When it comes to Darwin Award winners, it's all about jaw-dropping moments of pure foolishness that end in fatal consequences. Natural selection at its finest. Take, for instance, a lawyer who thought it would be clever to demonstrate the strength of his office windows by hurling himself against them, but his story is just one of many. Join us as we look at 20 dumb ways people died. Number 20. Death by selfie. Taking a selfie seems harmless, right? But for some, it's become a dangerous obsession. The pursuit of the perfect picture has led hundreds of people to fatal accidents. In 2014, a Russian teenager named Xenia Ignatieva tragically lost her life just a month before her 18th birthday. She climbed a 30-foot railway bridge in St. Petersburg for a daring selfie, but lost her balance and grabbed a live high-voltage cable, electrocuting herself. She fell onto the concrete below, and despite her friend's efforts, emergency responders couldn't save her. Stories like Xenia's reveal the growing allure of risky locations for photos. Number 19. A dangerous mix. While the quest for the perfect selfie can lead to tragic accidents, as in Xenia Ignatieva's case, the drive for innovation can be equally dangerous, just as we'll see with this man who decided to try out a do-it-yourself experiment. Back in 2018, a man from New Zealand decided to get creative with his welding setup. He was looking for a way to make his work more efficient, but instead of sticking to the usual safe methods, he took a dangerous detour into a bit of DIY chemistry. The man thought he did something novel by managing to store the components of oxy-fuel into one LPG bottle. Normally, when welding, you keep oxygen and acetylene, an extremely flammable gas, in separate containers for safety. The two are dangerous enough on their own, but mixing them without proper controls? That's a disaster waiting to happen. And yet, this guy thought he had a better way to combine them. His new setup had a fatal flaw. It lacked the safety features to control the amount of oxygen mixed with the acetylene. Without these precautions, things could get out of hand fast, and that's exactly what happened. The man attached his welding torch to his makeshift gas container, sparked it up, and before anyone could react, disaster struck. In an instant, the entire shed he was working in was obliterated by a massive explosion, and tragically, the man didn't survive. Number 18. The unbreakable office windows. While the pursuit of innovation can sometimes spark genius, it can just as easily ignite disaster, as we saw in the DIY welding experiment gone wrong. But when it comes to proving a point, some risks are taken with even greater confidence. Gary Hoy, a respected lawyer from Toronto, was known for his daring and, at times, reckless displays of confidence. In a bid to impress a group of visiting law students, Gary decided to show off his office's unbreakable windows by launching himself against one. What had been a party trick many times before took a tragic turn that day. Instead of bouncing back as usual, the window shattered, sending Gary plummeting 24 floors to his death. This bizarre accident stunned his colleagues, who had watched him perform this stunt numerous times. The glass, which was supposed to be strong enough to withstand impact, simply gave way. To commemorate his life, a bronze bust of Gary Hoy was placed in the lobby of the Toronto Dominion Centre, a tribute to a man whose unyielding determination led to a tragic, yet unforgettable end. Just when you think this isn't daring enough, wait till you see the next one. Number 17. Francisco Lotufo Neto's fatal misjudgment. Sometimes the thrill of risk pushes others to even more dangerous heights, literally. In 2003, Francisco, a 22-year-old from Brazil, was enjoying a day with friends in a scenic area popular among thrill seekers. Feeling adventurous, he decided to take a daring leap from a cliff into the ocean below. However, the jump also came with significant risks, especially given the unknown depths and underwater hazards. Francisco ascended the cliff, sure of his abilities, and was ready to jump his window. Regretfully, he overlooked the fact that there are rocky outcroppings beneath the water and that the tides change. he threw off his estimate of the distance to the water and landed awkwardly on a sunk rock rather than in the ocean. His injuries from the hit were so severe that he drowned because the trauma from the fall prevented him from swimming to safety. Shortly after being hauled out of the sea, Francisco was declared dead in spite of his companion's best efforts to save him. Number 16. The stamp-proof jacket. In a different part of the world, curiosity made a man test the limits of his own jacket. In August 2006, Darren, a 33-year-old with a bright future and a loving family, found himself gripped by a dangerous curiosity. On an otherwise ordinary afternoon, boredom got the better of him, leading him to a reckless experiment. Darren had recently bought a new jacket and, for reasons that still baffle the mind, he decided to test whether it was stab-proof while still wearing it. Moments later, disaster struck. Darren managed to dial for help before collapsing in his hallway, leaving investigators puzzled. At first, police suspected an attack, but there were no signs of foul play. The truth slowly came to light, revealing an accident so bizarre it shocked everyone. Darren had unwittingly turned a moment of curiosity into a deadly miscalculation, with the coroner ultimately ruling it a tragic case of death by misadventure. This strange, self-inflicted experiment ended in the most unfortunate way, proving that some questions are better left unanswered. Number 15. Mysterious cure. Moving on from a deadly experiment with curiosity to a chilling display of blind faith, the next story shows that blind obedience can have fatal consequences. What began as a test of faith in a Zambian church took a tragic turn when a preacher's shocking demand left his congregation questioning not just their beliefs, but their survival. On what should have been a typical April day in 2019, the congregation of a church gathered for worship. They expected a regular service, but what unfolded was far from ordinary. Their preacher, a self-proclaimed prophet, took the pulpit and delivered a shocking command. He claimed that drinking bleach would cleanse them of their demons. Most people would not accept such an idea, but under the weight of their trust in this man, many of the churchgoers did the unthinkable. With no hesitation, they followed his dangerous instructions, raising bottles of bleach to their lips in a horrifying display of obedience. What followed was swift and tragic. By the end of this fatal test of faith, 27 people were dead, and 18 others were fighting for their lives in the hospital. Number 14. Dangerous transport. Shifting from a deadly act of faith to a fatal decision on a festive trip, danger often hides in the most unexpected places. A party bus is meant to be a fun time, but this time, it wasn't because of one mistake. In 2020, a tragic mistake during a wedding trip in Manatu, India, led to the untimely death of several guests. Packed into an overcrowded bus on their way to the celebration, some of the passengers, eager to make room, decided to climb onto the roof. Riding high on a bus is risky enough, but what they didn't anticipate were the low-hanging high-voltage power lines ahead. As the bus sped along, the guests atop the roof, sitting much too high, came face to face with these deadly wires. Before they had any chance to react, 3 of them struck the exposed lines. The electric shock was immediate and brutal. One guest was killed on the spot, while another died later from his injuries. The third, though surviving, wasn't left unscathed, suffering severe burns that left him forever changed. What was supposed to be a joyful journey to a wedding turned into a heartbreaking tragedy, all because of one fateful decision to ride high, overlooking the dangers lurking above. Number 13. Sword trick. From a festive tragedy to a deadly display of overconfidence like tempting fate with so-called supernatural powers, danger comes in many forms. In April 2017, a psychic performer from Chiang Mai, Thailand, met a tragic end trying to prove his invincibility. His signature stunt? Stabbing himself in the chest with a sword to show he couldn't be harmed. It was a trick he had performed countless times before, wowing audiences with ease. The secret was simple. The swords were fake, designed to break on impact. But this time, something went terribly wrong. Instead of snapping, the sword pierced his chest. He was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was fatal. After years of fooling crowds, this illusionist's final trick ended with a grim reality. He couldn't cheat death. Number 12. Snowboarding fail. Trying to trick people with a sword is one thing, but what's even stupider is when people try to show off, and it ends in tragedy. This time, a snowboarder at Bogus Basin in Idaho found the regular slopes too tame and craved something more dangerous. Seeking a bigger thrill, he set his sights on jumping over the main road leading up the mountain. Without checking for cars or traffic, he attempted the risky jump. But instead of landing safely on the other side, he crashed directly into the path of an oncoming SUV. The driver had no time to react, and without a helmet, the snowboarder had no chance of survival. The impact was deadly, and what was meant to be an exhilarating stunt turned into a fatal mistake, showing once again that chasing a thrill can come at a devastating cost. Number 11. Pain for fame. Risking your life on the slopes is one thing, but the hunger for internet fame can drive people to even more dangerous extremes. Building an online following takes time, effort, and creativity, but one Spanish YouTuber wasn't interested in any of that. With only 6 subscribers, he decided to pull off a dangerous stunt, thinking it would shoot him to instant fame. Late one night, he and a friend broke into an abandoned cement factory, aiming to create content that would grab attention. The plan? Climb to the top of a 165-foot tower while wearing a parachute, and then leap off for a dramatic jump. The YouTuber thought this would be the viral moment he needed. But things went horribly wrong. As he jumped, the parachute didn't open. With no time to fix it and nothing to save him, his friend could only watch in horror as the tragic fall ended with a deadly thud. The YouTuber's reckless stunt cost him his life, proving that chasing fame through dangerous risks is not the way to gain subscribers. Number 10. A refreshing swim. Moving on from the impatient YouTuber chasing fame, let's consider a different question. How much would you risk for a lost phone? For one Detroit man, the answer was more than anyone could imagine. On a freezing day in February 2020, while ice fishing, he accidentally dropped his phone into the dark water through a hole he'd cut in the ice. Now, most people would accept their fate, give up on the phone, and head home. But not this guy. Without hesitation, he dove right in after it, plunging himself into the freezing water. No second thoughts, no planning, just an impulsive leap into the deadly cold. It's hard to fathom what was going through his mind at that moment, but his decision was about to turn into a fatal mistake. The freezing water shocks your system, paralyzes your muscles, and if you're unlucky, can even stop your heart. The sudden plunge can leave you helpless, disoriented, and lost in the dark water beneath the ice. What exactly happened to him down there? No one knows for sure. Maybe the cold hit him like a brick wall, or maybe he just couldn't find his way back up. But whatever the cause, the result was the same. Hours later, rescuers found his body under the ice, cold and lifeless. Number 9. Hazard prevention. Just when you think things can't get any worse, they often do. If risking retrieving a lost phone in freezing water wasn't bad enough, our next story takes thrill-seeking to a whole new and deadly level. In a misguided attempt to have some fun, 2 friends turned a leisurely day into a deadly disaster, proving that not all targets are meant to be hit. Back in 2002, on a quiet farm field in Pennsylvania, 2 friends were out for some target practice. But instead of taking aim at the usual beer bottles or tin cans, they set their sights on something a bit more reckless: the electrical insulators holding power lines high above the ground. For whatever reason, the 2 thought it'd be fun to see how many they could knock off with their rifles. They fired shot after shot, and soon enough, They had managed to shoot 6 of those insulators clean off 2 utility poles. At first, it probably seemed like a harmless bit of fun, but things quickly turned dangerous. Without the support of the insulators, one of the high-voltage power lines snapped free and came crashing down to the ground. A live wire, buzzing with deadly electricity, now lay in the middle of the field. Realizing the seriousness of what they'd done, one of the men suddenly had a change of heart. He may have been careless a few moments earlier, but now he was thinking about safety. Too late, unfortunately. Desperate to prevent a fire from breaking out in the dry field, he made a split-second decision. He rushed over to the fallen wire, thinking he could move it out of harm's way. But in his panic, he forgot one crucial fact. You don't mess with live wires. The moment his hand made contact with the wire, it was over. The powerful current surged through his body instantly, delivering a fatal shock. He collapsed on the spot, killed by the very danger he'd been trying to avoid. Number 8. Ride of your life. Moving on from those trying to shoot down electric insulators, this next story shows that boredom may spark creativity, but sometimes it leads to disastrous ideas. In a tragic twist of thrill-seeking gone wrong, 2 young men in the Netherlands turned a mundane day into a reckless stunt that would end in heartbreak. In June 2020, in the city of Zevenaar, Netherlands, 2 young men, clearly inspired by a mix of boredom and a love for reckless stunts, decided to channel their inner daredevils. Maybe they'd watched one too many episodes of Jackass, because what they came up with was straight out of the Knoxville playbook. Tie a shopping cart to the back of a car and let one of them hitch a ride in it. Sounds ridiculous? Well, it absolutely was. The unlucky one, or perhaps the more thrill-seeking of the duo, climbed into the cart. His friend, taking the much safer role of driver, started the engine. As the car rumbled into motion, the brave cart rider stood up in his makeshift chariot, probably imagining the rush of wind in his face, the freedom of the open road, or at least the open parking lot. For a few moments, he managed to stay upright, holding on tight as they picked up speed. But as many people might have guessed, this wild ride didn't have a happy ending. It wasn't long before the shopping cart started wobbling, the wheels struggling to keep up with the growing speed. The excitement quickly turned to horror as the cart lost all control, flipping over and tossing its passenger onto the unforgiving pavement. In the blink of an eye, the fun was over. The young man hit the ground hard, and the crash was fatal. He died instantly, his last moments a chaotic blur of excitement and tragedy. Number 7. Coral snake. From wild stunts on wheels to an encounter with nature's own deadly beauty, thrill-seeking knows no boundaries. What began as a harmless adventure quickly turned into a deadly encounter in the Brazilian wilderness. In August 2019, a Brazilian man and his group of friends were out exploring when they came across a brightly colored snake. It was hard to miss. Its body was orange with bold white and black stripes. Normally, colors like that scream danger in nature. But instead of being cautious, the man made a risky decision. He picked the snake up with his bare hands and started waving it around as if it were a harmless toy. He even joked about it, mocking the poor creature. But what the man didn't realize was that this snake wasn't to be messed with. It was actually a coral snake, one of the most venomous snakes in the world. Things took a serious turn when the snake, clearly fed up with the man's antics, bit him on the hand. At first, the man laughed off the bite, thinking it wasn't a big deal, and continued to hold the snake. But his bravado didn't last long. In just a few minutes, the man went from joking around to collapsing on the ground as the venom spread through his body, shutting down his system. His friends rushed him to the emergency room, but the venom had worked too fast. By the time they arrived, it was already too late to save him. Number 6. Michael Anderson, Godwin's fatal error. From deadly encounters with nature This next one reminds us that electricity is not our friend, and we should be mindful when involved with it. The incident occurred in 1989 and involved a series of unfortunate decisions that led to Godwin's untimely death. Michael Anderson Godwin was a convicted murderer who was sentenced to death in South Carolina. While awaiting execution on death row, he was provided with basic amenities, including a television in his cell. In a bizarre turn of events, Godwin faced a dire situation when his television malfunctioned. Godwin was so frustrated with the faulty TV that he decided to try fixing it. Sitting on the metal toilet in his cell, he managed to fix the TV by improvising an electrical connection with a metal object. But he didn't think about the risks associated with combining power and water. In the process of trying to fix it, he unintentionally made a circuit that caused an electric shock to kill him. He died instantly from the shock, which made for a tragic and ironic conclusion. Before we continue, it's time for today's subscriber's pick. Take a look at this picture. In what might go down as one of the most puzzling and avoidable accidents, this young man made a choice that shocked everyone around him. Wanting to impress his peers, he brought something completely unexpected to school: an old rocket launcher. To him, it was probably a cool antique, something to show off and get a few laughs. But this wasn't some harmless joke. Instead of leaving it at just a strange show-and-tell moment, the young man decided to take it a step further, turning a curious situation into a fatal mistake. Climbing onto a desk, he thought it would be fun to see if this relic from the past still had any juice left in it. With no real understanding of the danger in his hands, he aimed the launcher across the classroom, unaware that this decommissioned weapon still had some life left in it. As he squeezed the trigger, what was supposed to be a harmless stunt exploded into pure chaos. The rocket launcher fired a live round, instantly filling the room with shock and confusion. The blast was fatal, killing the young man on the spot. His classmates, who had no idea what they were about to witness, were left completely speechless, staring in disbelief at the disaster that had just unfolded. What started as an attempt to stand out among his peers turned into a horrifying moment no one in that room would ever forget. Number 5. David's final protest. Shifting from a young boy's disastrous attempt to impress his classmates with a piece of history, we look into a protest far more calculated, yet equally disturbing. David File's final protest is a story from 2008 that revolves around an extreme and tragic act of defiance regarding his housing situation. David File, a 50-year-old man from Bishopstoke, England, was the last remaining resident of an apartment block that was scheduled for demolition. The authorities had offered him multiple alternative housing options, but File refused to move. He had lived in the flat for many years and was adamant about staying, despite the building being desolate and abandoned by all other tenants. File ultimately made the decision to stage a dramatic protest in order to express his frustration at being compelled to leave due to constant pressure from the council. He decided to end his life in a gory and complex way as a sign of tremendous defiance. File set up a chainsaw on a timer, then lay down and let the device chop off his head. When officials found his body, the neighborhood was shocked by how he died. Number 4. The Edward Archbold's fatal contest. Unlike David File, who had meticulously planned his grim protest, this next case took an unexpected and horrifying turn during what seemed like a harmless challenge. Eating contests are supposed to be quirky and fun, but for 32-year-old Edward Archbold, a 2012 event in Florida turned into a fatal test of endurance. In a bizarre competition hosted by a local pet store, participants were asked to devour live cockroaches, worms, and other insects as quickly as possible. Archbold, eager to impress the crowd, stuffed himself with as many creepy crawlies as he could in a race against the clock. But what started as an attention-grabbing spectacle soon became a nightmare. Moments after the contest ended, Archbold began gagging and struggling to breathe. Within minutes, he collapsed, and tragically, his life ended in front of the horrified audience. The cause of death? Asphyxiation, as his body reacted to the sheer volume of insects he had consumed. What was meant to showcase bravery turned into a deadly cautionary tale about the perils of pushing the limits for attention. Number 3. Jason Linden. Theft gone wrong. Just when you think you've seen it all, another story comes along that's even more shocking. Let's look at the reckless 1997 theft by Jason Linden, where one dangerous mistake proved fatal. Linden attempted to steal a valuable industrial power line from a construction site with the help of an accomplice. Whether they ignored the warning signs or simply didn't realize, they failed to recognize that the cable was live, carrying a deadly high-voltage current. Armed with a hacksaw, Linden began cutting into the thick cable, hoping for a quick payday. But the instant he made the cut, he was struck by a powerful surge of electricity, killing him on the spot. His accomplice escaped unharmed. Number 2. Takuya Nagaya's snake transformation tragedy. Cutting a live wire is crazy, but what's even crazier is believing you're a reptile and doing something really dumb because of it. A 23-year-old guy from Aichi Prefecture named Takuya Nagaya had a mental breakdown and thought he had changed into a snake. He started acting strangely and erratically during the episode, crawling on the floor and hissing like a serpent. His mother summoned his father, Tatsuji Nagaya, to the scene in an attempt to exert control over him after becoming concerned about his actions. But rather than going to the doctor or trying to soothe his son, Tatsuji Nagaya used force. He started abusing his son because he thought he could drive out the snake from his body. He repeatedly struck and kicked Takuya over the course of several hours, causing serious injuries in an effort to exorcise the snake spirit. Tragically, Takuya succumbed to the brutal assault and died from his injuries. The father's deluded belief in his son's transformation into a snake, coupled with his violent response, resulted in a fatal tragedy. Tatsuji Nagaya was later arrested and charged with his son's murder. Number 1. Lessons not learned. Believing you're a reptile is bizarre, but ignoring life-saving precautions in the middle of a pandemic, that's on another level of recklessness. In November 2020, a Serbian Orthodox church hosted a shocking service for a high-ranking bishop who had died from COVID-19. Despite the cause of his death, safety precautions were ignored entirely. The church was packed with crowds, most without masks, crammed into an enclosed space. Attendees even shared Holy Communion from the same unwashed spoon, practically inviting the virus to spread. Worse yet, mourners lined up to kiss the hand of the deceased bishop, who had died from the very virus ravaging the world. Unsurprisingly, the consequences were immediate. The church patriarch who organized the event soon fell ill with COVID-19 and later died. One can only hope his funeral was handled with more caution than the dangerous gathering before it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.